that I think that people should not be vulnerable in to, I guess, very specific people is for married people to be mindful of their vulnerability about their spouse or partner with their own family and very close friends. And so, hey, girlfriends, welcome to another episode of Girlfriends and Goals. We're your hosts, Miosha.
And Samaria.
This podcast is a space where we'll talk about friendships, life goals, a little bit of pop culture, and all things womanhood.
Okay, our top goal this year is to grow our podcast audience. So if you're new here or you're an avid listener of this podcast, please make sure you're subscribed, leave us a 5-star rating, consider writing us a review, and of course, be sure to share this episode with a girlfriend or two.
All right, we're going to kick off today's episode with a brand new segment, which is called Get Into It, where we talk about what's been trending in pop culture.
So today, our topic for Get Into It is going to be Megan Good. So I know you've heard, Miosha, that she and her husband are getting a divorce. And I just wanted to see how you felt about how the news broke and what people's responses have been to it.
Okay, so I actually heard some rumors about their divorce, I would say about 2, 3 months ago. And when I heard it, I was just like, no, there's no way. And I don't know why, because I don't know these people in real life, but
Right.
um, yeah, but there were just rumors. And then when it finally broke in December of 2021 or last month, I was just like, wow, I guess the rumors were true. I guess she had been seen out by herself, not wearing her ring. And, people on the internet be looking and watching, paying so much attention to every little detail.
They really
Nothing,
do.
yeah, nothing is going to get past them. And so I guess for me, I don't know that this is surprising, but some of the responses I saw was a lot of people basically saying, like, see, even if you practice abstinence and you're into the church or whatever, it still doesn't mean that your marriage is going to last or be successful.
Mhm.
And it just made me feel like those people, like the people who are saying that, they probably were never genuinely interested in
Yeah.
following that path. And maybe that couple wasn't the couple that maybe you should be following anyways, especially if that's kind of your response when you hear about their divorce. And so it just made me feel like people are jumping to an extreme, even though they were married for, I think, almost 10 years.
Mhm.
And throughout the course of their marriage, like, we didn't hear anything too crazy, like,
Nothing distasteful.
yeah, like no divorce or cheating rumors. And even the way the split happened, it seemed very cordial. And we still haven't heard anything else. So it's like, yeah, if you don't use this for justification for the way you want to live your life and the decisions that you want to make. Like, if it's not for you, just let it not be for you. But you don't necessarily need to use their divorce as the reason for why you're going to go do what you wanted to do anyways. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that. A lot of the responses that I've been seeing have been saying stuff like, "Oh, she really had to change herself to like fit in with him and what it was that he wanted." And it's like you don't even know that. Like again, we don't know these people, so you don't know that she had to like conform to some unrealistic standards just to get him. It could have just been like that's where she was in that time in her life and they were the greatest match. But now, people grow and grow apart. So yeah, I thought people were really like hard on her. I saw a lot of negative things geared towards her, and I'm like, dang, why does the woman always have to get like the brunt of it? And I kind of feel like, man, she deserves better because this lady has
Mhm.
been like acting out here since she was a child. She's given us all these years of her talent, and this is how people are dragging her on the internet. So yeah, it felt I felt some type of way about it. Just seeing people talk about her. And then of course the weight thing. Like someone was like, I need a refund on my book. And it's like the principles that they talked about can still be true. It's just that for these two people, it might not have worked out. And whether you're in the church or not, like
Hmm.
marriage problems are marriage problems. I mean, I'm not married, but I'm guessing like marital problems are marital problems, whether you're a part of a religion or not. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting that people were coming for her and demanding refunds on the book. Like, dang, what did the book do?
Yeah, I will say though, I did see some clips from a couple of interviews that they had did over the years, and they did openly talk about how, Megan's life was maybe somewhat one way or headed in one direction, or there are certain things that she was doing before she got married, and just how those things changed after. But, she's beautiful, she's smart, talented, all these things. And I just never got the vibe that she was going to completely flip her life
Mm.
just to be married. Like, let's not pretend that she's not a whole catch. So, like, she was that it girl.
She was, and to me still is, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, like I don't think she's the woman that would have to do all that, especially to into a marriage. Like,
Mm,
clearly this is something that they both wanted to do. They both maybe had to make certain shifts, which
right.
can happen with marriage. And yeah, I think anytime you put your marriage on a public platform, especially attach it to a book, people are always going to be super critical when things come out or if things happen. And that's why a lot of people choose not to take that route because it could just be a lot.
I am so glad that you said that because that is actually the perfect segue into today's topic. So, on this episode, we are going to talk about vulnerability. And I feel like a lot of times on the internet, you see this encouragement to be vulnerable. And I think that's needed. But on the other side, I think there's some really good reasons why people probably shouldn't make themselves that vulnerable out here on the internet. So, and that's whether it's like with your romantic life or just with what's going on in your family or with your friends. I think there are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't or you should consider not being so vulnerable. So, I wanted to ask you personally, what are some of the things that prevent you from being so vulnerable?
For me, one of the first things I think that makes me not want to be as vulnerable is just not wanting to have to explain or give reasons why I have a certain stance or why I feel the way I do on something.
Mm,
Just not wanting to have to explain, because if you tell someone, just the natural reaction is, well, why?
right.
And sometimes I don't always feel like explaining why. I maybe don't even have what someone would consider to be logical reasons. I might just feel the way that I feel, and it is what it is. And
Okay.
I don't always feel like explaining that. And then when you're explaining, that can sometimes open the door for, especially if you're talking to a person who doesn't align with you on said thing, but
Hmm.
for them to take that as an opportunity to maybe change your mind or um, to get you to leave from the conversation feeling different about it. And there are just certain things in my life where I don't feel like, I guess, taking that open route
Hmm.
and being vulnerable about those things, because I may feel solid about those things and I'm not just interested in having a change of heart or change of mind, or just having to explain myself. And then I think in general, um, aside from myself, I think a lot of people see vulnerability as looking weak, or opening up about certain things can reveal areas of your life where you may not feel as strong in.
Okay.
And then they may just not see the benefits of being so open. So, I've said these things okay, well, now what? And I'm not saying that I don't see benefits to it. I just think some people, depending on the topic, may not see the benefits or the positives about being so open, because
Yeah.
then what are the next steps?
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching this interview on the Kev on Stage Studios app that we talked about last episode.
Yes, you go.
But I was watching, they have this show where I think it's called like Coming to the Stage, where they interview people whose names we've heard, but they talk about their stories and how they got to where they are. And Jackie Ino was on there, and she was just talking about creating this like distance between what she wants to put out there and what she doesn't. And obviously, as an influencer, people feel like a sense of entitlement to know everything. And so she hasn't been talking about her wedding. She's like, certain things about my relationship I don't put out there. And yeah, so I think she's right, of course, because she can do what she wants to do. But I think based on the interview, that was what she was saying. Like, I don't want to put all of me out there. Like, there are some things that I want to keep to myself. And I can agree with that. One of the reasons why I wouldn't want to be so vulnerable about certain things is because I am happy the less that people know about me. And I like to control narratives, I guess.
She
I
likes
don't
being mysterious.
I just that's not it. I think people think that's what it is, but I don't care about mystery. I just don't want you to know what I don't want you to know, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. So for me, that's one of my reasons for not wanting to be too vulnerable. But then I think there's like a sense of rejection, or like a fear of rejection, that comes when you are so vulnerable. So like if I say this to somebody, and it's not the right space, either now they don't want to like fool with me, or they might take advantage of that. Like, I've exposed something to them, and 5 months from now, when we're not in a good space, they might use that against me. So I think
Hmm.
there's like the fear of rejection, but also the fear of that information being used against you. um, so yeah,
Yeah.
those are the reasons why I think people usually don't want to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. So, on a scale of 1 to 10,
Mhm.
how important is vulnerability to you in your non romantic relationships? So, how important is it for the people who are close to you for them to be vulnerable with you and for you to be vulnerable with them?
On a scale of 1 to 10,
And you
probably.
can only pick one.
I know you're the one who has problems picking one. Don't play me.
I know, right?
But on a scale of 1 to 10, I if it's someone who's close to me, right? We're talking about close people.
Hmm.
About a 7. What's your number? I want to hear your number.
I'm a 5.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a 5. I think for me, I'm okay even with my close friends, even with you,
Mhm.
on being on a need to know basis. Of course, I'd want to know more if possible, especially if there are things that I feel like I could be of a support to you.
Yeah.
And when I say support, I don't mean me coming in trying to fix it, trying to tell you what to do, just literally being there for whatever you need me to be, which could just be a listening ear. Just because I think vulnerability is something that should come natural. And if it's meant to be, and if we click in that way, we have that connection, these things will come out. But if not, then they won't. And I'm okay with that. I just think vulnerability can shift over time for different reasons. Um, and it can just evolve over time. And if it just naturally doesn't go that way, I'm okay with that.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna stick with my 7, because I don't think, like, it's not a 10. I think it's
Mhm.
like right there in the middle. I think it is important for the people in my life to be vulnerable with me, just because it helps me feel closer to them.
Mhm.
Like, it makes me feel like, oh, they're struggling with something, and I'm the one they've come to. Even if I can't like resolve it, I can like pray with them or hope for the best or, support them, like check on them, whatever. So it is really important to me that people who are very close to me can come and, just like be vulnerable. And
Hmm.
that helps me in turn to be vulnerable with them. So, like, if I feel like there's a certain level of closeness you feel to me, then that makes
Hmm.
me want to feel closer to you, kind of.
Hmm.
So, I'll say it's definitely important. Now, I don't think every friendship requires that. Like, I am all for surface level friendships or
Hmm.
surface level relationships, even if it is like extended family or whatever. Like, I don't have to know everything about everybody, but I'm thinking specifically about the people who I talk to often.
Hmm.
Yeah, I would just hate for them to be going through a situation and then they feel like they can't open up with me about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the period of time often because it would be weird if we're talking every week, every other day, and then I don't know something big that's going on in your life, and maybe I'm noticing a change in you, or so I just noticed something's going on, and I have to be like, "Hey, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
that would be that would definitely be weird, and I will say for you and I don't think we ever had, I know we never had a conversation around like, hey, we should be more open with each other.
If
It,
you did that to me, I'd be like, girl, get out of here.
I know. It just naturally happened over time.
Mhm.
And I don't think there was ever anything where we were like, oh my God, girl, you didn't tell me that.
Yeah. And I also don't think, I'm just thinking about reflecting on our relationship. I don't think it has to be something that's done immediately. So I've had people come and say things that happened maybe years ago and they just got to a stage where they wanted to talk about it. Like stuff like that, I don't mind. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
immediate, but it does make me feel a sense of closeness when people do trust me with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess since we talked about non-romantic relationships, how important is it to you in a romantic relationship? And like what has been the role of vulnerability you feel like in your relationship?
So, being that I am married, I'll talk about it from just a married standpoint.
Mhm.
I think vulnerability is very important with your spouse or life partner. My opinion is that it leads to a strong foundation, just being able to be open about things so that both people can really know who they're choosing to be with.
Yeah.
Before you decide to spend the rest of your life with a person, if you're living with someone day in and day out, you're building a life together. I think the more you know about a person, it gives you the opportunity to understand them so
Mhm.
that the journey could be that much better of an experience. Because sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And with a person that's your spouse, that's probably going to be the closest person to you, aside from probably your children or your own parents. But your spouse has a different dynamic with you, your partners, and this journey called life. So I think it just provides a way for you to be on the same page. And conflict to not come about because you literally just didn't know, because you didn't
Yeah.
say anything. You didn't create the space for the other person to know, and vice versa. So these conflicts or things that may come up could really just be unnecessary if you had just talked about it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't like having to guess. And this is outside of romantic, but since specific, since we're talking specifically about romantic, like, can you imagine just having to guess how somebody feels about every single thing? And now you're like, well, I don't know what move to make because you're not opening up about what it is that you want. And obviously this doesn't happen on day one, but
Right.
I do think like eventually that's something that if people need to get on the same page about, just so you can avoid conflict. I
And,
think.
oh,
Oh, go ahead.
and I'll just add as well, If you imagine over the course of a relationship or a marriage, that's just kind of like getting you into the gate. So you're
Mhm.
starting off at a certain level or space of vulnerability, but then you're also going through life together. You're getting older, going through different experiences.
Mm.
So at least if you start off from a space of being vulnerable and open about certain things, as as life progresses, you've already kind of set the stage for that openness. So as you grow and develop, it'll just naturally continue.
Yeah, so I love like very deep conversations. And that's why like you guys know we do the we're not really strangers conversation starter games here, but I use those cards in real life, like with people in my life. Like I will sit down and play that game with them because I just adore like I want to know how you think, why you think the way you think. Like I just want to know. I saw this meme that was saying cuddling isn't enough. I want to be inside your skin. But that's like me with conversations. Like I want to be inside your head. Like I want to know. So vulnerability obviously is a huge part of that. And so if I'm at a 7 with my friends, I'm definitely at like a 9.5, 10 in romantic situations. But similar to what I said before, I think I've seen in relationships where one person, right, or the man in my case, was willing to be vulnerable about something. And for me, that was like, oh, wow. Like, and I knew it was a big deal because they prefaced it by saying, okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and tell you this. And they expressed that it was a big deal. And then they were vulnerable about it. So for me, as someone who can be a little closed off, even though I love deep conversations, that's with people who I already know. But as someone who can kind of be closed off in the initial stages when I'm getting to know you and you've taken that step to be vulnerable, like it kind of pushes me to want to be vulnerable in situations because I'll remember, oh man, that was a big deal for them and they shared it. Let me get a little bit out of my comfort zone too and share whatever else, with them. So yeah, it's a big deal to me.
So, do you think that you have been intentional or are intentional about creating space for others to be vulnerable with you? And if so, how have you done that?
I don't know that I've been intentional, honestly. Like if I'm being real with myself right now, probably not. I would like to say that I have, but I don't think that's the truth. I don't think I go about every day like, oh, I need to make space for this person. Um, and I think I've probably dropped the ball probably a million times on like creating a safe space just because sometimes I can be very cut and dry, like, okay, this makes sense. Nothing else makes sense outside of that. And not even in response to people. I think when you're just having conversations with people like you and I are having now, if I
Mhm.
say, oh man, I hate white refrigerators or white refrigerators are so ugly. If you just bought a beautiful white refrigerator and I said that, like obviously you're going to feel like this is not a safe space to talk about white refrigerators, you know? And that's a stupid example, but just, that with anything else that's more important. So just in regular conversation, I think expressing how I might feel about certain things, people might realize, okay, she's not the place for that. And I can think of like a few examples, but I want to hear from you first. Like what do you think you've been really intentional?
I don't think that I've been really intentional. And in fact, I don't think I've ever thought about this before this question. Just to be 100% honest, I hadn't thought of it, but I do think that I do make it a point for the people who are around me or my close friends
Mhm.
to know that they can be vulnerable with me without having to worry about if I'm in alignment or if I agree with them, if
Okay.
that will affect my ability to be supportive or a listening ear.
Mm.
So I try to do that by not always being quick to like give feedback or say like, oh, well, I would do this or I approve. If it's something lighthearted, I think that's a little bit different because there's a certain banter between friends that will just happen naturally. But I try not to be so quick about it. I try to just listen. And
Mm,
even when I do feel different or I feel like, hey, this is something that we won't agree on, my first thought is just to be supportive. Um, just because I think sometimes people just want to be open and get things off of their chest. They just want to put it out there. And my opinion, my thoughts, my feelings aren't really as relevant.
yeah.
I just need to be there and be supportive. And I think for the most part, all of my friends, they have been able to be vulnerable and tell me certain things. And I know for a fact that we don't agree on everything and they know that too. But
Mm,
they're still willing to come and be open with me. So I'm not intentional, but um I think that I guess I kind of have been a open space. So
just naturally. Yeah, I think the ways that I can think of, so these happened like years ago. So I am 29 now, and I think this happened when I was maybe 21, 22. But there were two different people, so two different occasions that made me just stop and be like, it must be you. But I had two friends who were with child. And so each time, okay, so when the first person told me, she was like, she came and spent the day with me, and then at the end of her day, I'm walking her out and she like shows me the, ultrasound picture. And then she's like, yeah, so this has happened. I was like, oh snap, look at you, didn't think anything of it. But then the next thing that she said was, yeah, and I already know this is the person who I want to be married to and, spend the rest of my life with or whatever. And I was like, go for it. Didn't think anything of it. But then the other friend had a conversation with me, and was just like, I think she had me like guess, you know, and like, so I'm guessing all these things. And after I gave my guesses, then she said like what she thought it was. And then the next thing that she goes to is like, yeah, but hopefully marriage is the next step and all of that. And so I'm like, based on those two instances,
mhm,
I I think that they viewed me as someone who would judge them because they hadn't gotten married first or whatever. And so I'm
mhm,
like, it must be something about me. I've never had a conversation of like with them about pregnancies or anything like that. So it must
mhm.
just be me. And so just like thinking about things before we had this recording, this podcast recording, I'm like, man, maybe I could have been more open in certain ways. And I'm not the type of
Mhm.
person who feels like I'm everything to everybody. Like I don't think I'm a vulnerable space for every single issue or whatever, but I do remember those moments and I feel like maybe younger me could have been more open.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's that.
Interesting. I guess my first thought would have been that they have a high regard for your opinion.
But why and why on this?
I think it's the way you maybe carry yourself. I don't know that I don't know that I would necessarily jump to that it's something about you.
Hmm.
But maybe because you know yourself better than I do.
Exactly. Look. That's what I'm saying. But I will say I think I have improved because like within the last year, someone has had a conversation with me about those things, and I was on the opposite side. Like I was the person who they felt like they could come to talk about things like that. Whereas the person who they talked to before was the one who I guess was more judgy. I don't know. But anyway, so I
Mhm.
think I've grown from that point, but I will never forget those two occasions just because they happened within the same year,
Mhm.
you know? So yeah,
Okay.
I think I can always do better with just being that space for people. And I like, as we're talking, I'm thinking about the fears question, or the reason why people aren't as vulnerable. And I think like one of those reasons is probably you feel like someone views you a certain way, and then you're vulnerable in an attempt to show them, oh, I'm actually not that way. And instead of them taking your vulnerability and being like, oh, okay, I see her in a different light, they still think of you in the same way. So it's like I've been vulnerable for no reason. And
Hmm.
like that, I recently felt that way. So last episode we talked about like apologizing, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll apologize for anything, but you have to be careful the words that you say, because literally within the next week after we recorded that, I was hit with a situation where I really did not feel that it was my my place to apologize, just to be frank. And that was one of the reasons I felt like an apology would have made me vulnerable, but this person wouldn't have been like willing to accept it. Like they
Hmm.
still would have thought what they wanted to think regardless. And so I wanted to kind of protect myself from being
Hmm.
vulnerable and like having them reject me in a sense. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, you don't see the benefits.
Yeah, and I did what I had to do because I'm like, oh, that episode is about to drop and I don't want to be a hypocrite. So I
Mhm.
thought about it long and hard, and, did what I needed to do, because it really did need to be done. Like, it was warranted. So, yeah, but I just wanted to circle back on that because I think apologies do require vulnerability. We talked about humility and like
Mhm.
letting go of the ego, but vulnerability too. So
Yeah. So, when and where do you think people should be vulnerable? Like, do you feel like there are certain spaces or people that are just off limits for those two
mm.
areas?
The internet. It was just crazy because I do love the internet. I love social media. That's no secret, right? But I do think there is a balance that you have to strike. And I don't know what that balance is. So my tendency is to just not share much, but I think it's a balance of okay, I want to share this because I think it's something that can benefit other women or other people, right? And so you'll have those people who respond nicely to that, and they're like, oh, I really needed this, I really needed someone who was authentic, who was able to share this is going on with them because it's what's happening to me. But on the other side, you have people who are like, they're going to drag you for it. Like with the whole Megan Good situation, they didn't have to be vulnerable with like sharing their marriage and their process and all of that, but they were, and it helped a lot of people, but now people are using that against them. So there's like some type of balance that must be struck, and I don't know what that is, but I think the internet is a place to be careful
Okay.
when, it comes to vulnerability.
Okay. Okay. For me, I'm going to go a little bit closer to home. So, an area where I think that people should be vulnerable is that I think parents should be more vulnerable with their children. Um, I think often it can be easy as parents um, to think that being open or honest or vulnerable with your children, obviously about age appropriate things, that it can make you look weak or that they may not maintain a certain level of respect for you because they know too much about you. But I also think that as parents, they're your children's first teachers. And so I think there's a lot of benefits to being open with your children about things that you've done really well, but then also things that maybe didn't go your way or in your favor. So I think just parents, instead of taking the approach of, I guess, maybe trying to maintain this viewpoint of being perfect, just using it as an opportunity to, I don't want to say be relatable to your children, but show them like, hey, these are the things that I've gone through. And I'm not just telling you these things as a, hey, like, do this, do that, but more so that I've actually gone through these very specific life experiences. I think your children could benefit from that. And then the area that I think that people should not be vulnerable into, I guess, very specific people, is for married people to be mindful of their vulnerability about their spouse or partner with their own family and very close friends. And so, um, it's natural, especially if you're close with your family and your friends, that you want to tell them the things that are going on. I just think that for certain things within a marriage, that you should seek other outlets. So counseling, or whether it's to a church or pastor, but just being mindful of that in regards to your spouse, because your family, they maybe could be more forgiving and understanding of you and other family members, but that understanding may change when it's not a person who's quote unquote blood related. So yeah, that's an area where I'd say seek a different outlet other than
Mhm.
your close family.
Yeah, I love that. I wanted to go back to the parent thing first though, because
Okay.
I think that's such a great point because it doesn't reduce you in the eyes of your kids. I think it makes them want to listen to your advice even more than what they would have if you weren't relatable, or if you weren't saying like, "Hey, I've made these mistakes." Like, I'm speaking from a place of experience. I think whenever someone else has experienced something, it just makes you feel like, okay, well, that's one mistake that I don't have to go and make because now someone has shared that with me. And so I think it's
Mhm.
like with parents, with like close loved ones, for example, like things that you've done as a new mom, right? Like if you share that with me, if you say, "Oh, this time period was really rough and this is the stuff that helped me get through," one, it makes me look at you like, okay, she's more relatable because now she's like humanizing herself even more. And
Mhm.
that makes me want to come to her with my concerns. That makes me want to open up with her when those weeks are a struggle for me too. So yeah, I love that you brought up that little point. I was thinking about Real Housewives of Atlanta,
Mhm.
and I don't think I've ever watched a full season of this show, but there are certain things that end up on the internet that are like classic moments. And I remember like Phaedra cutting down, I think it was Kendra, about her not being able to like have a child at that stage. And
Mm.
so yeah, I think about those things along with the Megan Good situation, and just think how like people are so I don't know, vindictive. And so to bring it back to the beginning, like this is why when I see those posts that say, "Hey, be more vulnerable," I'm like, "Ooh, I don't know." Like you really have to be very careful about what you're vulnerable. And it sucks because it's like so many more people could benefit from that, but because of these like terrible human beings, now people are a little bit closed off. So that's why I'm hesitant when it comes to like um the internet and public platforms. But I do think like within relationships, there's less exposure to the rest of the world. So all that to say, please like be vulnerable about these tough topics with your cousins, your sisters, your nieces, your nephews, your friends. Like be very vulnerable, maybe in those spaces, but just be careful about the internet, which we all love and enjoy, but you really have to be mindful. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Girlfriends and Goals podcast. You've heard our thoughts on this topic, but we would love to hear your thoughts as well. So make sure you follow us on Instagram at Girlfriends and Goals podcast, where we'll continue this conversation over the next week. If you haven't subscribed already, please go ahead and do that now. Don't forget to rate, review, and share. Until next time, bye.
Bye.